Hi everyone, it's Lit Lessons with GCSE Memes. Today looking at another poem from the poetry collection Time and Place made by the Edexcel board. And today's poem that we'll be looking at is First Flight. So what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at some context behind the poem first of all, the background behind it, analysing the three key emotions to remember about the poem before then looking at a summary of the poem, thinking about the key things we've covered and also three key poems that we could compare this poem to in an exam. Before we do that though, let's have a look at the context. So, this is the background behind the poem. And the first thing to remember about this poem is that UA Fanthorpe, the poet herself, worked in a psychiatric hospital. And this poem seems to be, to some extent, looking at the effects of flying for the first time on the mind of that person. Secondly, a lot of her poems include more than one poetic voice, and that's certainly the case in today's poem as well. This was written as well during a time when air travel was booming and commercial air travel was only continuing to grow, 1988. And she herself claimed to be a bit of a people watcher, and it seems to be that once again we have her, the poet, thinking about how people react differently in different situations. So she was kind of a studier of people and the studier of their minds as well. Now a key word for today is this word here. It's shifting perspective, and throughout this poem we see this shifting perspective where a narrator or poetic voice changes suddenly in a poem. And does regularly as well, and that's definitely the case in today's poem. And I have, as always, put for you some highlighted notes here so that you can get these down as part of your revision. So these are the key things to remember about this poem, and I will allow you here to pause the video and invite you to pause the video here so that you can get those down. Now, as I've already said, today's poem is one of the poems where we do see more than one poetic voice. We also have that shifting perspective as well, and there's at least two poetic voices in it. Now for today I'm going to just be talking about the poem as if it has two poetic voices in it, an experienced flyer and a first flyer. But the experienced flyer, as you'll see in purple here, could be as many as 5, 6 even different voices, but for today we'll consider the fact that the one voice in this poem is the pink, which is the first flyer, and the second voice is the experienced flyer in purple. Now what I've done with the three key emotions for this poem is I've actually split them into two, and for this first one there is fear in the first flyer, there is relaxation in the experienced flyer. And this is pretty evident in the contrast between the way in which they speak. And what we find is that there's a real serious formal tone and very polysyllabic long word choices by the first flyer. So if we have a look, I'm just having a look down, I can see of cumulus bearing the crinkled tangerine stain. It's quite a sort of serious formal poetic tone captured by that first flyer experiencing their first flight. In comparison, we don't have that quite as much with the other one, and that's because this voice, the first flyer, is certainly terrified, also strangely amazed and in deep thought at the thought and the implications behind flying and flying for the first time here. But voice 2, the experienced flyer, is far more conversational and informal in their tone, and this kind of reflects the calmness of a voice who is clearly a seasoned flyer, someone who is used to it and no longer feeling the way the first flyer is. So if I have a look at Know What I Mean, which is a question used by the experienced flyer, immediately we get this sense that they are kind of relaxed and not in any way troubled with the thoughts that the first flyer is feeling. So that's key feelings for today, number 1. Key feelings number 2 are these here, and that is humbleness versus arrogance. Okay, and this is created by the stream of consciousness where the writer is attempting to capture the character's thought process exactly how they would think it. Now this only really applies to the first flyer, but they are humbled by the idea of flying. Flying basically makes them feel small and unimportant. And this is very evident throughout the poem. But throughout the poem as well, they mention a desperation to turn back and go back to England, or to not leave England whatsoever. And this kind of quiet humbleness that exists within them really contrasts with the arrogance behind the speaking, not the thinking, the speaking season flyer, who condescends the people listening. For example, my last trip was Beijing. Know where that is? Beijing, Peking, you'd say. And they're actually talking here about the fact that Beijing changed its name and was originally Peking around this time. And them trying to show off their knowledge of Chinese city names is meant to show how well-travelled they are and how far more knowledgeable about the world they are than the other flyers. But really it comes across as just needless bragging. So that's key feelings number 2, humbleness and arrogance. The final of the feelings, key feelings number 3, this concern versus the indifference. And the concern is obviously with the first flyer. And this is very clear where they talk about the mythological. And there's a mythological reference right near the end of this text. And what we have is a reference to the gentleman we see in the bottom left of the screen, Icarus, who was a man who flew. He had wings made from feathers and wax by his father, and then flew close to the sun, and actually ended up dying because the wax on his wings melted and he fell into the sea. And what the voice seems to be doing here, the first flyer seems to be thinking that all humans are overreaching themselves a little bit with these growing technological changes such as commercial flights. And actually, as well as this, they talk about the world being colder as technology continues to advance. And this certainly seems quite applicable now when we think about where we are in 2020, and the world continues to seem a colder place, in spite of the fact that technology has grown even more significant part of our lives. In comparison, though, the other voice certainly isn't thinking as deeply about it, is not concerned with flying and the implications behind it at all. They're too caught up in their own self-importance to be thinking about what flying means for the wider world or anything like that. So those are the key emotions of the poems and the voices within the poem. Now, as always, I've ended with a summary here, my favourite quotations, context, feelings, and my 3 poems that I would compare this to. Feel free to pause here and add these notes to your notes, and have a bit of a look and study of what I've chosen here. Right, to finish then, as always, I finish with a meme, and today's meme has got Pitbull in it, and I'm so excited about that. I'm a lover of Pitbull, and not even ironically. Any chance I can get to put a Mr. Worldwide meme in, I will. So, as always, please ask for any new content, any meme templates you want me to use, suggest them in the comments below. Do like and subscribe this channel for more of these videos, and follow our Instagram page as well. Thank you very much.